We are live.
Committee will call this meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Representative Blackburn,
Excuse.
Vice Chair Clausen. Representative Fortner.
Here.
Representative Heiner.
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Western.
Excused, he'll probably be a little late.
Representative Worf.
Excused, and he'll probably be a little late too, apparently.
Representative Winter.
Here.
Chairman Eklund.
Here.
7 present.
So the first bill for our consideration is Senate File 8. It's Weed and Pest Reorganization. And a brief overview is that the Office of State Lands managed the pest problems on state lands before this. This will transfer the responsibility over to the Department of Ag. And what I guess I'd like to do, and I think it would be the easiest way to do it, is bring the Department of Ag up and the State Lands Office up, and you can both field questions for the committee. So committee, if you have questions on the bill. And I guess I'd first like for you to go ahead and comment on the bill and give us some feedback, see if we need any changes.
Mr. Chairman, my name's Jennifer Scoggin. I'm the Director of the Office of State Lands and Investments. I have with me here today Cole Lambert. He's in our Field Services Division. Unfortunately, Deputy Crowder has been working this bill, and we found out this morning early that he is unable to be here today. So you've got the B team, if you will. So we'll do our best to answer your questions. I've got a couple of comments on the bill first, and then to the extent that the committee might have questions about how the current weed and pest program runs. That's why I have Mr. Lambert here. So first of all, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we have constitutional concerns that this bill will provide authority over management of state trust lands to a third party, which was never anticipated or contemplated by the Constitution. Article 18 of the Constitution, Section 3, provides for the Board of Land Commissioners and states that they have direction, control over disposal, leasing, those sorts of things. So the Constitution itself does not provide for a third party to oversee management activities on state trust lands. We view the weed and pest program as one of those things. The next comment I would have, Mr. Chairman, is on page 2, lines 16 and 17, where it provides that for any lands belonging to or under the control of the state of Wyoming, the director will coordinate with the Department of Agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. Any lands under the control of the state of Wyoming, we think is a little broad. Perhaps that should be limited to the Board of Land Commissioners. Then that would include the state trust lands as well as the institutional lands. Otherwise, we think potentially this could include lands held by Game and Fish or WYDOT or other state entities. So we would just make that comment.
Okay, clear that up for me again.
That's on page 2, line 17, where it says of the state of Wyoming, maybe swap out Board of Land Commissioners, that they're for any lands belonging to or under the control of the Board of Land Commissioners. Just so it's clear.
I'm going to back up just a little bit. You said there may be some constitutional problems with us switching this over. All right. Is there a way of correcting it in the bill without changing? I mean, it sounds like we have to substantially change the bill to satisfy that requirement. So I'm surprised we're just, did the Senate hear about it? Yes. Representative Clausen, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think director shall coordinate with would cover the constitutional issues. That means both agencies are kind of overseeing this.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, I think our concern here is that from what we understand, the decisions related to dispersal of funds for weed and pest management on state lands would go through the Department of Ag's process, where I understand there's a 3-person committee. And so why we would still have to apply to receive those funds. So this would not be decisions by the Board of Land Commissioners or OSLI on behalf of the Board of Land Commissioners making those judgments with respect to weed and pest removal on those state parcels. There would be inserting of a third party to do that. And while, yes, we will consult and the legislation requires us to consult, we arguably think that this may run afoul of the Constitution because it's not leaving those full management decisions in the Board of Land Commissioners. And Mr. Chairman, in answer to your question, yes, we have raised these issues both in the interim level as well as on the Senate side too.
Okay. Eventually, I would like to, we will have a few more questions here. I'd like to make sure we can clear it up so that we don't have that constitutional problem. And I'm not sure we can do it because of what we were trying to accomplish. So Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Can you go tell us what we're trying to add in and in what line?
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson, if you're looking, I believe I have the right copy here, on page 2, line 17, where it says of the state of Wyoming, we would request that it be changed to of the Board of Land Commissioners. So it's just lands within the direction and control of the Board of Land Commissioners, not all lands under the control of the state of Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, we do appreciate the appropriation for both the trust lands and for the institutional lands that was addressed on the Senate side. The thing that we are a little bit confused about is on page 4 under section C, the 1-to-1 match. Currently, we do have some programs within our rules, I think leafy spurge, where we actually pay 100%. So we're not quite sure what the intention of the 1-to-1 match, if that will now include leafy spurge and other things that we pay more on. Also, it's unclear. It says that if it's unclear to us whether the Office of State Lands and Investments is to be the applicant for the funds or whether it would be our lessees. There is a provision that says that the match would not be required if the applicant is the Office of State Lands and Investments for weed and pest control on state lands that are not state school lands. So is that just for institutional lands? We're not exactly sure the intention of how that's supposed to work, and perhaps Director Miyamoto could help us with that as well.
Director.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Doug Miyamoto with the Department of Ag. Excuse me. Sorry, I probably can't provide you any clarity because I had this section marked as trying to clarify legislative intent as well with the match requirement. So both of them read the same to me. If you look at section B and section C, 2 different pots of state funding, both requiring in my limited analysis would require a match from any other applicant other than the Office of State Lands and Investments. So the way I read it was that if Jen's office applies for a grant from the Department of Agriculture to do a weed control project on any lands under the Board of Land Commissioners control, they don't have to meet that match requirement, but anybody else would.
And Mr. Chairman, that's kind of how we read it, but typically our match comes from our lessees, correct, Cole? And so we weren't quite sure if the intention would be now that we would bring these requests on behalf of the lessees, or if the lessees would be going to the Department of Ag with our blessing. It's a little unclear how it's all supposed to work. So I think that was our point. We're just trying to make sure we understood the legislative intent.
Okay. Questions? Yeah, Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering if the director or directors could provide some backstory why this piece of legislation is in front of the body here to move the weed and pest responsibilities from one department to the other. Is there something that caused this to come forward?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, I'm not exactly sure of the complete backstory, but it's my understanding that this is part of Senator Boner's endeavor to make government run a little more efficiently, to have all of the weed and pest match functions under one roof. And Director Miyamoto, if that's incorrect, certainly correct me, but that was my understanding, was Senator Boner was trying to consolidate the efforts so they're all under one house.
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, yeah, my understanding is similar to that in that, typically there has been weed and pest control projects that have been conducted mostly by my friends with the weed and pest districts at the county level, and they would apply for funds to go out and do that work on the Office of State Lands, administered lands. There was a small amount of money that would help them do that, and they could apply for grant funds from the Office of State Lands to get that work done. And then what this would do is say, okay, we have a different pot of money by which the weed and pest at the county level can apply to the Department of Ag, because they do that already at a much larger scale for other projects. We have grant funds that we administer through the State Allocation Committee and the Weed and Pest Council that allocates funds to the weed and pest offices around the state already for other types of lands. State lands was never a part of that. This would integrate multiple land ownerships under essentially the same kind of management scenario where you have your State Allocation Committee that is considering disbursements of funds to treat invasive species on all different types of land ownership patterns, whether they be private or if they're federal. Now that it could be state lands. So it kind of put that all under one tent.
Follow up.
So, Director, if this is an effort to streamline our operations and improve the efficiency, why are we appropriating another $250,000 from our general fund to make this more efficient? Does that truly make us more efficient if we have to appropriate additional money towards this endeavor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner. There was a $300,000 allocation that used to be provided by the Office of State Lands and Investments for which the weed and pest offices could apply. And that money was reserved to do invasive species work on state lands. As part of budget reductions over the previous years, that funding availability was taken. That was part of I think the step 2 reduction, somewhere in the State Lands Office reduction proposal. And as I understand it, it has always been in the lessee's agreement that the lessee would be responsible for invasive species control on the lands that they lease. And so kind of had this discussion that started, who's responsible to take care of the invasive species problems on these lands? And if we as the state of Wyoming, we're going to undertake that project, what would be the best case scenario for how to efficiently get that work done? So essentially, Representative Heiner, the way I understand it, this was an effort to replace the money that used to be there for weed and pest to apply for. Now it would be a different pot of money that we would be disseminating in a identical way that we already give out money for other types of land ownership to weed and pest to go do their work.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add on to that quickly. I don't want to give the impression that there was no weed and pest activity being conducted on state lands after those phase 3 budget cuts. We were merely using our trust preservation and enhancement account to do those and to only work on those areas that were absolutely necessary because of the budget and the lack of funding. We were doing everything we can to preserve programs internally and not have to give up like our grazing lease program. We have 1-person programs. And so this, it was difficult to give those funds back as part of phase 3. But as I mentioned, we were utilizing our trust preservation and enhancement account to do weed and pest as absolutely necessary. So it's not as if weed and pest work was not getting done on state lands.
Okay. Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With this new bill, will the leasee still be able to do their own weed spraying as well as the state? And if so, will there be special use permits that they have to fill out, things like that, like such as the PUP for the BLM, the pesticide use proposal? Will they have to go through that mess to do their own spraying? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fortner, Cole, do you want to answer that for him, please? You know more of the ins and outs of the program.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fortner. Currently grazing leaseholders, mineral leaseholders, all of our leaseholders are required by their grazing leases or respective leases to do everything that they can to treat noxious weeds on and pests on their respective leases. So that does not look like that's going to change at this point, and I would hope that we would still continue to have a good working relationship with all those lessees.
Okay, I guess I'd have a question. So Representative Fortner, you contract sometimes for spraying on state lands. Present system, the way it works and the shift that we're making here. We're gonna have other people testifying, but I'm kind of curious, since you do this, how well does this present system work? And would we improve it with this bill?
Well, I think my brother now leases the state ground that I used to lease that my granddad's had for decades. But anyways, and as new weeds come about, well, some of them's not really new. Some of them's been there for a long time, like spurge and knapweeds and that kind of stuff. And industry has come along into these school sections and drilled wells or done exploratory work, and then they leave weed base behind. And a lot of that weed base has got out of control, even with the leasee hitting it every year. And I'll give you an example. The school section my brother leases now is going to have to be done aerial because it moves so fast across there in these dry years. So anyways, I can see where this would be a huge benefit. I just don't want it to be burdensome for the leasee that's there already.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just
Yeah.
add on to
Go ahead.
Representative Fortner's comment. That's one of the concerns that we have is currently the way our weed and pest program works. We receive requests to expend those funds. And we look to see where funds have already been spent within the state so that we're not putting all our funds in one area, if you will. And then a decision is made internally amongst our field services folks. And then the authorizations given, they go out, they conduct the work, they bring back their receipts and they're reimbursed for that. This kind of adds in another layer, if you will, where we may be able to dialogue with our lessees and even our field services folks about where weed and pest treatment may be required. But now we then will have to go to the Department of Ag and their 3-person committee for the actual authorization. And it's not clear to us if then the check will be cut or how that's all going to work. And of course, that remains to be seen. But we're concerned just about that additional layer in there.
Yeah, Representative Fortner.
With this extra money on this extra project that the state's taken on or the ag's taken on, will there be new personnel added to this program or will it stay the same? I didn't see anything about new personnel in the fiscal note. I just seen the 300,000.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fortner, it's my understanding that there will not be additional personnel. Originally, one of the previous drafts of the bill required that OSLI transfer to the Department of Ag any personnel and equipment that's currently utilized to run this program. Right now, we don't have a full-time position, if you will, that actually takes care of weed and pest control on state lands. It's more a little bit from this person, a little bit from that person, a little bit from the other person. So it's our belief, and I'm Director, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that it could be absorbed into your current system.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fortner, yes, the Department of Agriculture has a weed and pest coordinator, Slade Franklin, and he manages existing grant programs, use treat invasive species and other aspects. And so this is an area that would be a relatively small undertaking for him, and he's assured me that he can do this, and we can fold it into our existing state allocations committee as Director Scoggins has referred to already. And it would be our intent to allocate the funds in the same way that we do for other programs that the Department of Agriculture already administers in the invasive species realm.
Representative Wharf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess one of the things that in hearing the testimony, I know we've talked about, sounds like there's quite a few parcels of state lands that have been vacated or they're not currently being leased. Does this enable you, if it's been up to the lessee to take care of the weed problem, all those vacated parcels, does this not put you in a better position for the state to manage those vacated parcels if weed and pest takes over this program? I guess that's a question for either anybody at the table. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wharf, currently our rules and regulations for this Board of Land Commissioners authorize us to pay for 100% of chemical applications on those vacant parcels.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I guess my question is, does this allow it to be better cared for if it's turned over and the weed and pest is able to ensure that that is actually that somebody's taking care of it, as opposed to leaving it out there hoping that the state lands picks that up and takes care of it?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Warp, it's my understanding that if there are issues that the weed and pest districts notify us, or our field services folks inspect and notify us. And then I guess the beauty of the current system is then we have the funds at our fingertips and can go expend those funds to address those concerns immediately. Whereas again, I think we would have to turn to the Department of Ag and ask for those funds on vacant land.
So Representative Wharf, I'd add one thing. If they're vacant lands and nobody's managing them, oftentimes you're not even going to know the weeds are there until somebody comes in and leases it. So that's a problem. Yeah, go ahead.
And Mr. Chairman, I guess that's kind of the reason I'm asking the question is I'm trying to understand if what we're doing makes it better, or if we're adding more complexity to that process. I obviously want to make sure that it's being taken care of. And if there's not a lessee there, if the state lands has been able to adequately do that, I mean, I don't know that. Nobody's got at least, I don't know who's monitoring it. But my question is whether or not this bill, in your opinion, if this is a bill that moves us forward, or we stepping back, because I want to make sure we're doing something that's positive. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I might respond from the Department of Agriculture's perspective to Representative Wharf's question. Our county weed and pest offices around the state have early detection programs, and they're conducting reconnaissance within their county boundaries. And obviously some capabilities vary by county a little bit, but there are also collaborative processes that are integrated, amongst the counties where they're doing landscape scale reconnaissance for different invasive species. And I would like to think that most of the lands in the counties are being looked at in some kind of rotation at least. And we get reports as part of the state allocation committee that does show the current status of invasive species, either growth or reduction every year. And so I do think that the county weed and pest offices are positioned pretty well to keep track of what's going on in the county generally, particularly with lands that are accessible, state lands or lands that are adjacent to any existing projects that they have. I think it would be somewhat unusual for a parcel to go many years without somebody laying eyes on it and assessing, the status of invasive species.
Okay. I guess a question I've got, so we get back to the constitutional issue. Would we solve the problem alone in this bill with the appropriation? And I know it's kind of throw out the part that doesn't meet with the constitutional requirements, because I'm not ready to pass a bill that doesn't do that.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not quite sure how to address the constitutional concern we have. As I mentioned, Article 18, Section 3 provides that the Board of Land Commissioners has the authority for disposition, leasing, all those sorts of things related to state lands, including what I would expect to be the judgment on where weed and pest funds need to be spent to address those issues on state lands. The thing that we're having heartburn over is this bill essentially inserts a third party, which is the Department of Ag. And while we get along very well with our sister agency, we don't think that that was contemplated by the Constitution with respect to turning over those decisions as far as where funds will be spent for weed and pest management on state lands to Department of Ag. We think those belong under the umbrella, if you will, of the Board of Land Commissioners. The Board of Land Commissioners and OSLI, I think we're in the best position to act immediately to get those funds out. This, again, as I said, we believe adds in an additional third layer. And if it were just a matter of, I guess, getting the money, and we make the decision and maybe getting the money from the Department of Ag, that might change things. But I think the concern is that they would actually have their three-person committee make those decisions about where the money would be spent. And that's where we think this runs afoul.
Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman, so I guess I'm seeing this just a little bit different. So under the current process, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but under the current process, the county weed and pest would find the problem, they would bring the problem to you, and then you would contract back to the county weed and pest through the Board of Agriculture. Under this, if you go to page 2, line 17, the director shall coordinate with the Department of Agriculture. And I think that takes care of any constitutional issues. It's just a matter of management, and it actually removes a layer, as far as I'm concerned, that they wouldn't have to go back through the same process that they just came up with.
Thank you. Okay. We'll move on and get some more testimony and input. Thank you very much. We may call you back.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, committee.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Can I have your permission for one more piece of information that I
You
wanted
certainly
to,
may.
that I wanted to
That's-
submit to you before it was finished?
That's
here?
what we're here for.
If you go to page 3, lines 22, line 22, under that section B, you see, so page 3, line 22, that's where I'm
22?
looking at.
22. Okay.
Yeah. This is a question that's kind of in line with Director Scoggins' previous inquiry, and it's talking about this match requirement. So typically, the way that we run all of our grant programs within the Department of Agriculture today is that when we have match requirements, they typically specify that the match has to be from some other source other than state funds. So we're looking to leverage usually private funds, federal funds, some other source of funds in order to optimize the dollars spent. And this part on line 22 would seem to indicate that the match could come from any other source, meaning that if it's the intention of the legislative body that the Department of Ag could use this $300,000 to match with other state funds, that would be somewhat different than the way we typically do this. I just didn't know what the preference of the body was. Is it, do you want us to match existing state funds with this $300,000? Or is it your intention to specify that we need to match that with other sources of funds outside the state of Wyoming?
Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman, just a question back. So there could be several funds, the way I understand this. So you could do county level mill levies, federal grants, other state grants, just so we have a clear picture. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, yes, my interpretation of the way it reads now is if a weed and pest or if a lessee were to come to the State Allocation Committee and apply for a project on state lands, they could bring match money from, it might be county funds, it might be private funds, it might be state funds that they've already gotten from us. And they're looking to match that with this pot of state funds. But that's what I'm saying is that would be a little bit different than the way we typically do our grant programs today. We don't allow state funds to be matched with other state funds typically.
Representative Fortner.
Has anybody ever checked into trying to get 0.5% of our severance tax money for the weed and pest? It's never been funded with a steady funding model. The severance tax actually comes from mineral, coal, oil and gas extraction. A lot of that damage to the state lands and private lands and everything else is done by those industries. I think it's only fair to take some of that money and put it back in to where they've been working, cleaning up some of the mess.
I'm gonna go over here first. Representative
I
Clausen.
might give you a little background on some of that. So some of this would actually be severance tax if it came from school foundation or general fund. It would just be the long way around the barn. Wouldn't be a direct appropriation, but sort of is the answer.
Yeah. It comes out of that pot of money, the school foundation program, but a great deal of that money comes out of the severance general fund. Go ahead.
Director Miyamoto, so do you foresee a problem if we had some sort of a matching between other state dollars? The funds that are appropriated here or matching with county dollars, or do you think that's very manageable?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, I don't have a preference really. I just wanted to point out that, you know, in the grant business, typically, you know, at either the state or federal level, if you're applying for grants, they won't allow cash matches from the same source. So typically federal grants can't be matched with other federal money, and typically state grants can't be matched with other state grants. We can manage it either way.
So while you're still here, and one more question on this item B. Do we need to exempt out leafy spurge since it's one that is usually paid for by the state at 100%? It's not a match funding, or does it fit into this? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think it fits okay the way that it is in that state lands and investments aren't subject to the match requirement anyway for the program. It's essentially for them. And so yeah, if they were to come with a project for leafy spurge, there would be no match requirement. So I think we could work around that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'd like for our weed and pest councils here, and if you gentlemen would like to come forward and
Chairman,
Morning.
Mr. Chairman, and
Oh, you can go ahead.
members of the committee, I'm Josh Shore with Park County Weed and Pest.
Larry Smith, Chairman of the Weed and Pest Council, President. We're here, I'm here to say that my executive board and all 23 districts of the council are in support of this bill. We see it as an opportunity to double up the money with the $1 match and really maybe get some work done on state lands. And with that, I'll let the guy that has the technical speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the previous directors, a lot of their comments, they've already made a lot of the points that we had here to discuss. One other thing I'd like to bring up, as far as I know, in the regular budget, there is no money allocated for the state lands weed and pest control right now. And this bill would bring back the $300,000 and put this, if the bill passed, it would, and if the money was appropriated, it would make its way into the bill. But right now, there's no money going forward into the next biennium for weed and pest control on these lands as far as I know, which that could impact a lot of projects around the state, especially with things like leafy spurge, spotted knapweed, ventonata, Medusa head, some of these ones that we've been really working on the last few years. And the state lands are part of a lot bigger landscape level projects that involve other state partners, state agencies, federal partners, and private lands.
Without this legislation, how does it work now on state lands for the weed and pest? I'm curious. So I'm not close enough. I'm sorry. There was an indication from state lands that they do appropriate funds for the weed and pest control. It's out of other pots of money. How well has that worked? Because I do remember when they stripped the appropriation out of state lands for weed control, and it was during a budget cutting time, and they had to cut somewhere, and they did it there. Since that time, can you give me an idea how it's worked with state lands pulling the funds out of other parts of their department?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as I know, it's worked fine, and at least in my district in Park County. I don't pull as many state funds as other districts. We don't have as much leafy spurge, and thankfully we don't have as much leafy spurge as some areas, other areas of the states. But I think the state lands division using money out of other funds like their TPNE program has worked fine.
Okay. Biggest difference here, though, is a $300,000 appropriation. And I'm still trying to sort through how well it works with the other level for the Weed and Pest Council to bring the Department of Ag, have state lands and the Department of Ag working, coordinating together. How do you see that working for the Weed and Pest Council?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as I understand it, this money, if this was put back in, would specifically target noxious weed and pest control and invasive species. Or the TPNE program under state lands, that funds a lot of different things. It can fund weed and pest control, fixing fences, doing a whole myriad of different projects that they have to do on there. As far as bringing the management of the program under the Department of Ag, I think Director Miyamoto said it well. I think it would bring it under one house, and I would think it would help streamline things. There's a lot of weed and pest control programs and grant programs that are kind of managed under there, and this would help coordinate the overall program and the direction of large projects across the state of Wyoming.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, we got a question here. Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Currently, are there some noxious weeds that you spray on the state lands where the leasee doesn't have to help with paying for the spraying or the chemical? I mean, are there certain species that are totally funded by the weed and pest or the dollars?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson. The way that the weed and pest law is set up in statute, every county has access to 1 mil of property funding to run the program. They're also allowed a second mil, and they call that their special management program, that they typically focus on. Leafy spurge is the big one. If a district has, they call SMP counties, if they have that second mill declared, and the state lands will fund control on those SMP species. Typically, it's leafy spurge and one or two others. The state will pay 100% of those costs. So in about half of those counties where leafy spurge is the problem, the state lands will pay for those. And in other areas, the counties will pick up the entire cost of that.
Mr.
Representative
Chairman, I
Larson.
guess a follow-up. Do you see any concerns then where it needs to be a one-to-one match with the current way the bill is written?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, I don't see a problem with that right now. There's a lot of other sources. There is other state sources and state grants that don't come directly out of the general appropriation. There's also county district funds. If those district boards choose to participate and help those private landowners out, there's private funds, there's federal funds, there's private foundation monies out there. I don't know if I'm supposed to say the names, Elk Foundation, for instance, something like that. The WNRT grant, I guess that's state funding, but there's other sources, and I don't think the one-to-one match would be prohibitive in a lot of counties.
Okay, so we do have some other funding that would be able to match the state dollars. I'm trying to figure out how to wordsmith the bill so that it's clear that happens. Okay, committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Any other testimony on this bill? Come on up, Keith, and then we'll see who else might want to come.
Mr. Chairman, Keith Kennedy, on behalf of the Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts, we urge you to support this bill. I'll be more blunt than others before me. I was in this business for several years, worked for several of the weed and pest districts as a contractor, and several board members of county weed and pest districts have told me that they would prefer to work with the Forest Service or BLM rather than OSLI. So if that gives you an idea of the necessity of this bill, I've made my point. I would point out that there are other areas where the state owns property that are relatively well-funded. The noxious weed program on state and federal highways is one of those where the allocation committee that would be allocating these monies actually allocates money out to the various counties based on their mileage of highways and the areas that they need to treat as a way to be a good neighbor to those who border those right-of-ways and easements. And so I see this as something very similar where it's not only taking care of the state lands, it's also taking care of those who neighbor those properties as well. And with that, I'd welcome any questions you have.
Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. You see a constitutionality issue here?
I believe that this is directing the Office of State Lands and Investments to delegate this authority to the Department of Ag.
Okay. And I can vouch for the problems that you end up with. I've got a state highway that cuts through our property and I believe it's mostly birds, but they just carry seeds of all kinds and oftentimes the weeds are usually taken care of by the landowners.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that. I'm well aware of how much fun jointed goat grass is in a wheat crop.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Come on up, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim McGagn with the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, testifying on behalf of the stock growers and the Wyoming wool growers on this bill. And just 3 points I would make to you. I know there's been a lot of discussion about coordination within the agencies. I think we also need to bear in mind the efficiencies that come from coordination out on the land. These state land sections are often intermingled with private lands. And if the weed and pest districts can deal with one entity to get a project approved on a broad scale without having to deal separately with those interspersed problems of state or sections of state land, I think that brings some efficiency and some cost savings to the program. I would also address the constitutional issue, and we often remind ourselves that the Constitution places the management of state lands and the Board of Land Commissioners, but that constitutional language states under the direction of the legislature, and that often tends to get ignored. So you do have, there are some limitations. You do have some authority to direct how the state land or the Board of Land Commissioners meets their responsibilities. And I would submit to you that what's being proposed here is not really significantly different than the fact that the Department of Environmental Quality addresses some issues with state lands. The state engineer on water issues on state lands is engaged. State Historic Preservation Office is engaged on those type of things. And I don't see this as being, from a constitutional or legal perspective, significantly different than those others. And my final comment would be with regards to the match and something that has arisen. The state land leases, grazing leases, agricultural leases, place responsibility on the lessee for control of noxious and invasive weeds. Historically, that worked well because those lessees were virtually the only people on that land. Now, for the past 30 years, where there's legal access, those state trust parcels are open to the general public. And I would submit to you that the typical grazing lessee is being far more judicious about avoiding bringing invasive species onto their land than the general public that's out there recreating on that land every day. So I think as we move forward, the sense that the lessee should have the sole financial stake along with the state in managing invasives on this land is going to increasingly have to be brought into question. And I think this bill at least helps move that forward. It doesn't address that particular issue. I'm not suggesting it be changed to do so. But with that, Mr. Chairman, we would offer our strong support for this legislation, move forward as drafted. Be happy to take any questions.
Committee questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further testimony? We don't have anyone online either. Come on up, Brett. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Committee, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. My organization's goal is to get weeds controlled quicker. As has been mentioned, there's new weeds that are coming in that are quite invasive. And so we need a process that facilitates quicker management. Mr. Chairman, I believe this bill does that. So with that, trying to be brief, I will sit for any questions, sitting in support of the bill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further testimony? Okay, before we move the bill, any further input from Department of Ag or State Lands? Okay, all righty. Committee, what's your pleasure? Okay, been moved by Heiner, seconded by Clausen. Discussion on the bill, changes? Representative Clausen.
Page 2, line 17, the language from the state lands, let's see. Strike the of the state of Wyoming and under the control of the Board of Land Commissioners.
Okay, discussion on, well, let's see. That's a motion. Well, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I would maybe ask about a couple other, or an item on there. I'm not sure if lands belong to the Board of Land Commissioner. If you delete of the state of Wyoming, so I'm kind of wondering if it maybe should delete belonging to or.
Okay. Belonging to the state of Wyoming. Or under the, under the control of the Board of Land Commissioners. That sound okay?
That sounds better to me, but that's,
All
I'm
right,
gonna
well, let's-
let the bringer of the amendment.
All right. So there's a proposed amendment. And I don't know if you moved it yet. Did you move it? Sure you did.
I moved that, the amendment.
Okay, seconded by Larson. And the way this amendment would read, for any lands belonging to the state of Wyoming and under the control of the Board of Land Commissioners. And that's on that first sentence on page 2, line 16, 17. Is the committee good with that amendment then?
Question.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. Any other discussion and changes? Go ahead, Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I propose an amendment on page 3, line 22. It says from any source, I would insert other than state funds between source and for the matching.
Discussion on that proposal? Go ahead. Representative
Mr.
Larson.
Chairman, I just not sure if I like that amendment. Can I ask some of the weed and pest if they
Yes.
have
Yeah,
a
they
concern
can.
with that?
If anyone would like to add some input, you're sure welcome to come up. Councilman.
Mr. Chairman, I think during their discussion, they mentioned some other dollars that might be out there, and I didn't know if this would do away with those other ways of funding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson. To match those funds, excuse me, to match those funds with other state funds, such as the pesticide registration fee grant or WNRT, it would certainly be easier to do that. And I think it could lead to larger projects ultimately out there on the landscape. Would it be a deal breaker? There would be other funds out there, like federal funds, private funds, foundation funds, and it's not a deal breaker. I think allowing this pot of money to be matched with other state funds could lead to larger projects.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Larson.
could we have Mr. Shorb specify those again so I can write them down?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, which the other state funds, some possibilities would be from the pesticide registration fee grant. Any pot from the WWNRT. Any other direct allocation from the legislature, such as the special management program.
Those are state funds. Correct? Are those state funds?
Mr. Chairman, correct.
Okay. All right. Yeah, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you see any problems in mixing these state funds? I mean, do you have enough direction or oversight, you think, with the boards between the Department of Ag boards and the local weed and pest boards that they would keep any nonsense out of mixing these funds, that it would be used efficiently and prudently?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, I think it'd be easier to deal with those funds as a whole. A lot of those, like the pesticide registration fee grant, some of the SMP funds, they're all managed by the State Allocation Committee right now. And then bringing those other funds from the Office of State Lands and Investments together under one, it would be easier to see the whole picture as one. As well as that state allocations committee also handles direct appropriations from YDOT. YDOT transfer has the Department of Ag manage those funds on their behalf. So that's another pot of money that this committee handles, and that would be another part in seeing the overall picture of these large landscape level projects.
There's all Representative Heiner.
Thank you,
There's
Mr.
also the mill money that comes from the county that can be matched. And that's a different source of funding and private.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I understand that county money is not state money. What I'm trying to do is leverage our state money. And we've heard testimony that the lessees have responsibility for noxious weed control. I don't want to take that responsibility away from them. I know it's easier to get more state money, but as a representative of the state, I would like to leverage our money and spend it wisely. So if there are other funds out there in the private sector or the federal sector, I think we should utilize those funds rather than just going to the same pot of money every time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other comments? I'm trying to figure out how to word this so that we do this in water development. We try to take money out of, we exhaust every other kind of funding before we try to use our water dollars. And I think that's what Representative Heiner is trying to get to. Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we revisit this weed and pest stuff pretty often, and I think if we have a problem here, we can sure and come back and limit this, but I think we could give them a little slack. So I guess I'll speak against this amendment. We can see where it goes, but if we have a problem, I think we can come back and change the matching.
Okay. Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Representative Clausen. I'm going to be a no on the amendment.
Have you moved it's a suggestion. Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. We may do some work on it before this bill goes through the process all the way. We may be calling up Weed and Pest Council to figure out how to best use the appropriation. Because I see, I'm like Representative Heiner, I see it as a way of expanding the money and getting more weeds killed. If we have other matching funds that we can dip into. Okay. Any other discussion on the bill? Thank you. Okay, question on the bill as amended.
Representative Blackburn,
Excused.
Vice Chair Clausen.
Aye.
Representative Fortner,
Aye.
Representative Heiner. Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Western.
I don't believe he left a proxy, did he?
No, he did not.
Okay, excuse.
Representative Worf.
Aye.
Representative Winter.
Aye.
Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
7 ayes, 2 excused. Do pass with amendment.
Okay, thank you. Our next bill for consideration is Senate File 9. And for an explanation on the bill, one of the original brainchilds in this was Representative Clausen. So I'm going to give you the time to go ahead and explain what we're doing here. I think the committee kind of understands. We'll have some other input too. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if you'll remember the interim, the last 2 sessions, we worked on the revenue bonds. The first time the first go round, we kind of modeled it after the Pipeline Authority and Infrastructure Authorities. And this go round, That bill passed or didn't pass the House by one vote, made it through the Senate. We came back this interim and kind of found a unique little spot that the state's not using in tax-free revenue bonds. So under the federal tax code, we're allowed roughly 300 million, if my memory serves me correct, to sell industrial bonds tax, or not industrial bonds, but bonds tax-free. Part of those we're using through the I'm gonna forget the acronym, but we use them for loans for low-income housing or affordable housing. WCDA, I believe, is the acronym. That the state is only using about half of what's available under the federal tax code for tax-free revenue bonds. So what the idea is to well, let me back up one more spot. So currently the county commissioners can issue these revenue bonds, but we have never been able to get it done. There's a certain level of expertise that is needed to get the bonds rated and get through the process. It's not extraordinarily difficult, but it's not simple as well. We tried this in my county for actually a refinery, but it didn't. All the pieces didn't fall together. The bonds never got sold. So what this bill tries to do is pull this under the business council and get some expertise to get between the private sector bonds. The investors allow investment in agricultural processing under this federal tax code that the investor doesn't have to pay any taxes on the income of these industrial bonds. Basically, this bill is a conduit through the business council to put some expertise and get the bonds rated. We currently have some expertise under the WCDA. I think that's the right acronym. We currently have some expertise. We have a bond commission that gets those bonds rated. This would be probably a pilot program that if it works correctly, we could use it in other industrial places. The Infrastructure Authority and Pipeline Authority, they've not been used extensively, I think because of availability of other private funds. This avenue would be a way to not use any state funds, just administration basically, and leverage private funds and use the business council as just a conduit for expertise. And I can go through the bill page by page. We had in the bill that there couldn't be any state funds used. The Senate added that language 2 more times. They added language that you couldn't compete with a current business that's already doing that in that county with these bonds. And they added language that if there's any state funds used to that any bonds issued, the SLIB board would make sure that no state funds were issued as a result. And if they were, they would have supervision, but there's language that no state funds will be used. It's all private. The advantages to this is the projects have to be marketable. So they have to be economically viable in order to survive in the free market. It's not like our current model where we use basically state funds to prop up other things. It's basically a conduit from private business with expertise to someone with a processing project. And I'll stand for questions or go through the bill anymore.
So the Wyoming Business Council would probably run the idea of the project through their process and help everybody understand the viability of the project before this were done.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any questions for Representative Clausen or parts of the bill? Okay, we're going to bring up Jill Dragumba with the Business Council, I think, and anyone else who's okay. Wyoming Business Council, come on up. And I hope I didn't put anyone on the spot, but I did see you there, Jill, and you're probably the one that will be in charge of ag projects.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We have with us today Josh Keefe, who is our finance manager, and we'll let him kind of run the discussion on questions as he's the expert for us.
Josh Keefe.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, members of the Ag Committee, Representative Clausen did a very nice job kind of walking through the way mechanically that these bonds work around the state. Perhaps the only thing I would add to that is that it is not a liability of the county or the public entity that would issue the bond. And as he stated, really, just like WCDA, they act as the conduit agency. And also, as Representative Clausen said, the state gets roughly $300 million a year as an allowance, if that's maybe the best way to think about it, from the feds. WCDA typically takes half of that, and then the other half is allowed to be used for these types of projects. And then also, as you'll see in the bill, it is any kind of processing. There were questions on in the other side that about what types of projects, whether it's restricted to the beef processing one, for instance, or whether it could be used for adding value to beans or sugar beets or hemp or there. So the goal of this, I think, is that it is broad enough that it could be used for any type of project that is adding value that we're always looking for to the ag industry here in the state. So with that, really the Business Council, again, will act as that conduit agency. We'll try to kind of vet the project. But again, as Representative Clausen stated, it will really be up to the private industry to decide whether they would like to invest in this type of project or not. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did you say there's federal fundings in this bill?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fortner, I'm sorry, could you state that again?
I say, is there any federal funding in this bill?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fortner, no, there is no federal funding.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Josh, we've heard through some other legislation whereby programs such as these are sometimes not available for our tribal partners on tribal lands. Is this preclusive of this industrial revenue bonds? Would it be offered as well to our tribal lands and the reservation?
Chairman Eklund, Representative Heiner, there's nothing in the bill excluding that. I don't know that I can speak exclusively to the sovereign nation state type of situations. And so I would assume, again, I'm just assuming that it would be fine with that. However, it would be up to the private industry to decide still whether they'd want to invest in that project. So there could be potentially complicating factors, I suppose, if it was physically located within the boundaries of the reservation, but I don't know for sure.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
thank you. Could it be possible for you to verify that before this goes all the way through the House so that we can make sure that we don't impede any future projects on tribal lands?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hyde, I would be happy to do that.
Okay. Just kind of for the committee's benefit, could either of you go through the process you usually use to vet I think all of your projects, and it'd be good for us to refresh I kind of have an idea, but I'd like to go through that again, if you would.
Sure, be happy to, Mr. Chairman Eklund. So probably perhaps there's, as many of you know, there are a variety of programs of the Business Council. There's the grant, the Business Ready Community Grant Program, which is by far the most prolific, that by far gets the most attention. Also the Challenge Loan Program. We use a similar type of vetting in both as we go through those. The Challenge Loan Program, if you recall, is a participation with financial institutions around the state to do economic development projects. Typically what happens is we will receive a request via application. Perhaps what I'll do is I'll go down the BRC process because that's probably the one you maybe know the best. That is a grant application and loan combination, if they so choose, from the public entity in the county where they're located. That comes to the business council. We then not only make sure that it conforms with the statutes and the regulations of the bill, but also on top of that, a lot of times there's a lot of back and forth in negotiating things such as lease rates, the length of the loan, all dependent, again, a lot of times on cash flow and strength of the company, just like a usual bank would do. In my past life, I was a commercial banker for a decade, and so I still do that and evaluate those for risk to this day. So when we work with those things and try to make sure that it works not only for the state, works for the public entity, and works for the business to try and help make the project successful. Obviously, it still goes to public comment. There are still opportunities for people to express either for or against. And we have both a lot of times in business council projects. And so with that, I just would like you to know that there is a number of things that happen. We look at the business financially. We look to make sure that it is meeting requirements of the whatever program it might be, whether that's diversification, job creation, could be any number of things. We also make sure that it's also going to benefit the state in some way and benefit the local community, and really try to mold all those things together to try and have a good project. And a lot of times, I think a lot of folks don't know this, but it's not uncommon for a project to come to the business council and take a year before it ever actually makes it out into the public light. So there's a lot of back room work and a lot of due diligence that happens before it comes out in front of everybody.
Committee, any questions on that process or anything else? All righty. Well, thank you very much for coming to our meeting. Is there any other testimony on this bill?
Mr. Chairman, committee members, my name is Justin Leffler, the owner of Green Tree Ag and the brand Hemp Built in Hot Springs, Wyoming. I am asking for favorable consideration of SF9 revenue bonds for, excuse me, for agricultural endeavors. SF9 increases financing mechanisms for expanding and diversifying agriculture, an important sector of our state's economy. In addition to expanding meat processing capacity in the state, this bill could increase markets for alternative crops such as industrialized hemp. Industrialized hemp is grown where traditional row crops cannot be grown. The infrastructure needs are minimal, where the vast majority of farmers here in Wyoming are already set up, which makes Wyoming a great candidate. Products that are made from industrialized hemp grown here in Wyoming include raw commodities that can be exported to manufacturers to replace their synthetic product needs, animal bedding for Cheyenne Frontier Days, which has already happened in other venues, herd that can be used as alternatives for concrete and building materials like OSB and plywood, milled herd to be used for our own in-state oil absorbent and LCMs, fiber to be used and utilized for everything from insulation to rebar. In a memo from the Legislative Service Office dated May 2021, it stated private companies use IRBs as an alternate financing tool to conventional bank loans. This is very important for the hemp industry, which faces challenges obtaining commercial financing. There is none. There is no commercial lending. There's no loans. Everything that we do in the hemp industry right now is privately funded. So in closing, with alternative financing options available and new emerging ag business companies comes manufacturing and industry-leading companies that want to set up shop next to the ag processors that are generating the commodity that they need. SF9 is a must-have step for the progression of ag in Wyoming. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Committee questions. Representative Fortner.
Does the money created out of these bonds, does it all stay within the boundaries of Wyoming, or does it cross the borders or at any point?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fortner, as far as I know, the dollars are here in Wyoming and they'll be utilized here in Wyoming to actually build these processing facilities, which will allow us to export our products from our state.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you for coming before our committee. Other people with information or testimony. Go ahead, Brett, you first, and we'll, both of you, come on up. Yeah. No.
Not on this issue, Jim. Not on this issue. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, Committee, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. Sitting in firm support of this bill. One of the things I would like to point out is that it is for every agricultural commodity out there. Beef and beans, squash and greens, it'll cover every ag commodity. One of the things that I would really like to see is some more projects dealing with harvest of timber off of private lands. Other than in small areas of the state, we don't have a lot of sawmills. So private timber, the value of it, you can't truck it real far because it's a heavy commodity. If we can find something to give some more value to the landowners for the trees on their property. You know, right now, lumber is in strong demand. If we have the supply to help fix that, as an example, I think this could help out the private timber industry. That is an ag commodity. Every other ag commodity could benefit from this, strengthen our Wyoming producers. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for any questions.
Okay, I've got a question. So you're suggesting we might stand up a new sawmill, possibly as an answer. I just had this conversation with people that have trees on their land and no market for the trees, or not a good market, but go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, that is a hope. I mean, I use that as an example that we can get a little bit more cash income, improve the resources through correct harvesting techniques. I use timber as an example. As I said, in many areas of the state, it essentially has no value. So there's no management being done on it. So if we can set up some sawmills, it's a win-win situation for everybody in the state. And it will be a state commodity that we will be using. So I hope I answered your question, sir.
You did. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, Mr. McGagnon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of Wyoming stock growers and Wyoming wool growers, would certainly echo the comments of the previous speaker and would add to that. I think the timing is appropriate for this right now. As a result of what happened the previous 2 years with COVID and lack of meat getting into our meat counters, and that there is an effort underway and some commitments being made across the country to begin or to build more mid-size beef and lamb processing facilities. And we've tried for a long time to attract one of those to Wyoming. I think we would greatly benefit from it. I think if entities that are looking at investing in those and looking for potential locations see that the Wyoming legislature has passed this bill at this point in time, that can be very significant in attracting some of those investors or interest groups into choosing Wyoming over perhaps another neighboring state that might have other things to offer, but doesn't offer this ability to obtain state support and private funding that is made available through the state. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would simply urge this bill as written move forward. Thank you.
Questions, committee? Thank you. Any further testimony?
Mr. Chairman, I am Rebecca Burns, the Executive Director for the PAL Economic Partnership. Today, I am representing WEDA. The Wyoming Economic Development Association has 70 members comprised of economic development organizations, municipalities, and businesses all around the state of Wyoming. WEDA asks for your continued support for Senate File 9. Today, I would like to first off thank you for bringing this bill to the floor. I would like to confirm the need and respectfully request your continued work. WEDA thanks you for the work that you have done at the joint committee in the interim to move this bill forward. And as we've heard, it is a tool for economic development. We have a handful of tools already existing at the Business Council, and some of them fall short when it comes to value-added ag processing. For PAL, we have multiple meat processing projects that are in the pipeline, as well as expanding an oats manufacturer and potentially recruiting a hemp manufacturer. All of these projects could potentially benefit from Senate File 9. I would also like to just point out that when the legislature votes for a bill like this, what it really does is tells the agriculture community, hey, we're behind you. We're behind the hardworking farmers and ranchers and value-added businesses. And yes, business, we want to invite you to our state. So as an economic developer, oftentimes that vote of confidence is what a business needs to come into the state of Wyoming and invest. As an additional request, I would ask that the work doesn't stop with the passing of Senate File 9. Oftentimes, from a boots on the ground economic development perspective, what we find is that we also need to bring along our university, community colleges, municipalities, and counties. So what happens with projects like this is there's major infrastructure at the city and the county level. Some counties are well prepared and others are not. And so the education is a huge piece of this continued industry to grow and thrive. With that, Chairman, I will pass it off to my colleague from Goshen County.
Mr. Chairman, good morning. My name is Braden Konar. I'm the CEO of Goshen County Economic Development in Torrington. Goshen County Economic Development, as well as WEDA, asked for your support in Senate File 9. This piece of legislation could make a big difference in ag country, from meat processing to feed milling to hemp manufacturing. This legislation could be a tool for our economic development toolbox. It could incentivize locals to expand, grow, and diversify their operation. Additionally, it could be an incentive for us as the local economic development organization and/or the Wyoming Business Council to recruit new agribusinesses to the state. This legislation could make projects happen and in turn bring revenue, jobs, and add value to Wyoming agricultural products and bring forth new opportunities. One piece of this bill that I would ask to maybe reevaluate is the competition piece. I think when you think about the beef industry or the feed milling industry, I think in the heavy ag counties of the state, you're about guaranteed to have competition. And with this being private money, how is there a way to work around that piece, that just because they're in competition, why can't they utilize this means within their business? I don't know if that makes sense, but I think when in Goshen County, we're heavy in beef, we're heavy in grain. I don't know how you get around that competition piece of that, and to be able to utilize this avenue. I think that ties the hands of those when you talk about that competition piece. So with that, I would take any questions.
Any questions? Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Being this money is all going to go through the Wyoming Economic Development. You guys have been around for a while. Can you tell us some of your successes in the last couple of years as far as contributing back to the state as far as revenue and business? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fortner. So one big project comes to mind. That is GF Harvest. GF Harvest was a project that actually went through the Business Council not once, but twice. And the Business Council funds through the BRC program allowed GF Harvest to build a mill and then also a manufacturing warehouse. So at its peak, it has 20 jobs. Then that business sought to expand into the hemp industry to fortify their oat products with the protein that hemp provides. And so PEP, actually, my predecessor, led the way in getting the hemp bill passed. And that essentially looked like hemp fields growing in Northwest Wyoming. And honestly, to this point, it's really a trial, and it's a trial on the backs of industry and not on research and development, where generally that trial leads. But you're looking at an ecosystem of jobs. So not only for oat manufacturer, but like, let's take beef, for example. When you have a good beef processor in your community, we actually want more than one, especially when it comes to beef processing. You want custom, you want USDA, you want state, right? And so what that looks like is you have training, which is probably happening at your local community college through a certificate program. So there's jobs there. You're looking at revenue that's collected when you're selling the product that goes back to your cities and counties. You're looking at the actual jobs at the processing plant. You're looking at jobs that help market the product. And you're looking at agricultural jobs, not only to grow the beef, but also potentially to fatten the cattle. So anytime that you approve something like this to grow an industry, you're really expounding upon many, many jobs. It's not just one project and the jobs that are within that. There's a lot of unforeseen jobs that also go into that industry. Thank you.
Any other questions or? Okay, so yes, Representative Larson.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask Rebecca where she lives, and I'm really excited that she's here testifying in person.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, you know full well I live in Powell. Thanks for having me.
Okay, and I do know, I didn't catch your last name very well, but Braden's comments on competition, I don't know how we insert that into any of our legislation. And the reason I say that is because the whole capital system of America is built on competition and the need for it in order to function. And I don't see how we can put it in the bill. I do know where your concerns should come from, and I'm hoping that problem is continuing to be resolved. Yeah, Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman, the Senate put that in the bill, page 10, lines 12 through 15. We could take it out.
Okay. So it is in the bill. Okay, all right. Any other testimony? And so committee, I'm pretty sure we will not be able to adequately work the predator bill. So that one's going to be pushed to Thursday. We have anybody online? I'm hoping they're listening. Okay. Go ahead, Keith.
Mr. Chairman, Keith Kennedy, on behalf of the Wyoming Ag Business Association, we'd support this bill and would also support that amendment to take that out. Brings to mind a question in my mind. Let's say that a grain elevator in a given town wants to expand or create a large rail terminal. What about their other competitor in town that they already compete with? This would, and technically it would be open to both those folks too, if they felt that there was a market space for that additional facilities that they might contemplate. So I would urge you to remove that as well. That I'd welcome questions.
Questions? Representative Fortner.
I'd like to make a comment. Without competition, we put in place monopolies. And in Wyoming, we've done that in the past, and I don't like that. There's no growth for industry or business if we put monopolies in place. Thank you.
And then one of the things I'd add is you don't necessarily put in monopolies, but you really open the door for out-of-state businesses to come in and take over what Wyoming businesses could be doing. So I too am in favor probably of omitting this, but thank you.
Thanks,
for your
Mr.
comments.
Chairman.
Any other testimony? Okay, committee, what? Oh, Lisa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lisa Johnson. I have a private company, Orbis Advantage, and I do work with several clients during the legislative session. But one of the projects that our company worked on was the Wyoming beef industry study for the Wyoming Business Council. And so I just wanted to come forward, since you're talking about potentially removing that amendment. I just wanted to give you a brief example of the beef industry. So I think one of the concerns was, do we want to not let people compete using this? If a company used these industrial revenue bonds, would that be fair if there's already a beef processing company in that community or in that county? And a couple of facts just to share with you. When we did that study in 2020, there's about 75,000 head of cattle on beef in the state, and that number is about the same. But in those times, before there was a lot of expansion, the processing capacity in our state was only about 24,000 head. And now, with expansion of all different sizes of companies in our state, the processing capacity is about 45,000 head. So you can see that the processing capacity is not even 50% of the cattle that are available to process in our state, the number of head on feed. So to be concerned about competition is really not a concern, because we have so much more demand for ag processing. And so beef is just one example. So as a private business, I would ask for you to consider amending this bill and removing that amendment that prohibits competition or that hinders competition. Because as the gentleman said, competition is healthy and it's a free market state. So that's all I wanted to say, sir.
Okay. Committee questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll close the public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Larson and seconded by Clausen. Discussion on the bill. Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that we delete on page 10, lines 12 through 15.
It's been moved to delete those. Seconded by Clausen. Discussion on that amendment. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I think if we were going to use, if this involves state funds, I think you could have a pretty good argument against competition, but this is all federal fund, or not federal. This is all private funds and private business. This is just a conduit, and I'll bring the tools along. So I think it's very appropriate to strike this.
So, all right, Secretary, do you have that amendment? I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, that's on page 10, delete lines 12 through 15
Okay.
And renumber is necessary.
and renumber. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Yeah. All right, thank you for calling that to our attention. It's really better that we get it as much of it fixed as we can now, because we know what it's like to chase our tails around trying to. What lines again?
Mr. Chairman?
Good. Okay, I see. All
Mr.
right.
Chairman, I would amend my amendment. If the second would, or make, assume that is, what do I want to say here?
Yep, to include that as an
Yes.
omission as well.
Yes, thank you.
You have that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any discussion on the amendment? Does anybody know of any other place this might be in there? Good, good. Committee, I sense you're ready to vote on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That amendment passes. Any other discussion on the bill? All right, roll call, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Blackburn.
Oh, excused.
Vice Chair Clausen. Representative Fortner.
Aye.
Representative Heiner. Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Western. Representative Wharf. Representative Winter. Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, that's 7 ayes, 1 no, 1 excused.
Okay, and
Do
like I
pass
said,
amended.
thank you, as amended. So I apologize. We usually try to get as much work done as we can. We're going to run up against, should not work a bill in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Is there anybody here who came specifically to testify on the predator bill? But you can make it Thursday, you think? Okay, I figured so. All right, this meeting is adjourned then. Thank you, committee.